utopias, ultimately what they're talking about is a space of perfection, a society, a world, a space that reflects the best of humanity, and it's a space that can reflect the beauty of all the gifts that we have to give. It reflects our shared space and the beauty of communal life. And I think one of the things that's sort of important to think about when we're reviewing utopias is that oftentimes when people talk about a utopia, they're thinking it's some imagined space, and there's an assumption that it inherently is not possible. So oftentimes we watch movies. A lot of our sci-fi movies have these total dystopia moments. People like to refer to different points in history, different points just throughout different timelines, and emphasize the dystopian nature of it. But we don't always look at utopian moments in our societies, utopian moments that have taken place in our world, in our own spaces. But before you can really start envisioning an altered space or a future space, I think it's important to really think about those moments in our own lives which felt utopian. Because at the end of the day, we've all had some sort of moment in our life where we felt loved, where we felt appreciated. And I want us to just take a second or so to sort of acknowledge or think about these moments. Think about those moments when you felt a sense of peace. Think about those moments when you felt a sense of serenity. Think about those moments in your life where you felt joy, where you felt accomplished, where you felt appreciated. And these moments could be anything. It could be a point in time when you were, maybe you were talking to a friend and you had some epiphany. Maybe you went out on a hike. Maybe you had a runner's high. Maybe you were on the dance floor. Maybe you were just, you were communing with a stranger and just really had this enlightened moment. Maybe it was a nature moment. You were looking out at the lake. You were observing the ocean. But I really want you to think about those moments in your life that felt utopian. And it could be, again, it could be a nature moment. It could be a moment where maybe you accomplished something at work. Maybe you reached some goal and you felt this sense of satisfaction, this sense of peace. And it congratulating you or not. It didn't really matter whether anyone else felt this moment, but you felt this moment in your own life. And I'd like you guys to just kind of think about that for a second. Think about what that felt like. And think, too, about what are utopian moments. What does it feel like to experience utopia? Now, I, of course, just named serenity and peace and joy. There can be other moments, other kinds of emotions that you associate with utopia. And you can feel free to share them now if you want. I think that, again, I'm really sort of centering this idea of these utopian moments, that this emotion behind utopia, this feeling that we associate with utopia, I think is one that is important for us to kind of highlight, because that is going to be the foundation and the space that you go to when you start thinking about visioning. You really want to feel that. Okay, I have harmony from Naima. Is there anyone else, another emotion that people associate with utopia? Sheer glee, effervescence. Okay, balance, security, safety. Yeah, what are those moments where you felt safe? Was it a hug from a loved one? Was it when you were clutching a teddy bear? Oh, in the zone, unstoppable. Okay, when was that? Was it when you dunked a basketball? Was it, some tough project you were working on and the project launched? What is that moment? Relaxation, present, boundless joy, passion. These are all wonderful. And these are the emotions behind the utopia that you want to create, but they're also emotions that you've already experienced in your own utopias. And I think that's very important. Clarity. I think it's very important to note that utopia is not somewhere out there. Utopia is very much with you. Connection, boundless joy, passion, wonderful. So ultimately, utopia is a part of you. So that concert you went to where you just felt effervescent and you were just floating on high, that family reunion you went to where you just felt this ultimate connection, that moment when you were out by the ocean and you just felt this sense of serenity, all of that is a part of you. Those aren't moments. You don't have to go back to the lake or to that ocean to then experience serenity. When you went there and you saw that ocean, that moment, that calm, that serenity was within you. Something was awakened within you that you experienced. So the utopia that you want to experience is already within you. And you've already had these very tangible moments. And I want to bring that up because I think that it's important for us to think about utopia is an emotional space that we've experienced that we bring to the table. When we show up, utopia comes with us. And you can pluck from different timelines. You can pluck from these moments in your past. You can pluck from these envisioned moments from your future, where you're imagining certain happy spaces. And all of those are different timelines and different time frames where you take that emotion and you harness it for the present. So oftentimes when I talk about Afrofuturism, I talk about it as a way of looking at the future or alternate realities through Black cultural lenses. And when I say Black cultural lenses, I'm talking about the diaspora and the continent. The Afrofuturism, it is an artistic aesthetic, but it's also a way of self-healing. And so what we're doing now is more of like a sort of self-healing, community healing exercise where we're talking about utopias. Hey there, Simeon. So I just want you to keep that in mind. But also when I'm talking about Afrofuturism, it differs from some other takes on the future in a couple ways. One, in that it values mysticism. It values the divine feminine, meaning it values the intuitive realm as much as it does the conscious realm. And Afrofuturism also, it values, or it looks at time in a nonlinear way. It looks at the future, the past, and present as flip sides as one. And so I'm emphasizing that because I'm giving these examples of kind of reaching out to these different timelines. And a lot of that is grounded in Afrofuturism and a lot of perspectives on time that exist throughout the diaspora. So what we've established is when we're creating utopia, we start with the emotions that we associate with utopia. And then we go back and we think of those different moments where we experience the peace, the serenity, the boundless joy, this aspiration, this enthusiasm. We think of those different moments. And then we can imagine different spaces, places where we'd like to be, things that we'd like to do. And we imagine that particular emotion. And we take all those with us and say, okay, I have my own utopia. I know how to channel, how to harness utopia for myself in my own space. I know how to recall that emotion. And that's very important. It's a very important thing to kind of think about. So once you've got that straight, everyone, the next thing you want to do is, okay, so I'm recalling this emotion. I know how to draw it to me. I know how to experience. And you know how to experience this regardless of what's around you. So what you want to do is kind of have some items around you that kind of remind you of this serenity, this joy, this peace, this harmony that you're seeking. And it could be anything. Maybe it's a teddy bear that a friend gave you. Maybe it's the cup of tea that I'm always referring to. Maybe it's an object that you create, but something that you sort of like keep in your space as a reminder so that you have a practice of sort of maintaining a sense of this, of your own utopia in your own personal space. And you have to really kind of carve out time for this sometimes. Now, you don't have to go buy anything. You don't have to say, oh my goodness, I need to get this and I need to get that. You can just utilize objects that are already in your space and you let them be reminders to help you stay in this utopian space. Okay, great. So we've established that creating your own utopia. We've established that you might want to have items as reminders. And we've established that you've already experienced these different utopia moments. So now, when we go to create and we go to think about, say, the life that we want to have and the things that we want to experience, you're creating it from this realm of the utopia you've already had. And I'll repeat that again. You're creating from the experience of utopia that you've already had. Okay? So your utopia is working, you have this wellspring within you that you're tapping into to now build on this particular utopia because you know what it feels like and you know how to recall it and you know kind of how to be reminded of this serenity and the balance and the peace that's already within you. And you recognize that it's something you bring with you regardless of what's kind of going on in the world around you. So now when you start thinking about your own life and you say, okay, well, I want to create utopian experiences in my life. Okay, great. Well, you've had utopian moments. So before you get into the goals of what you want to achieve, I would ask you to list the emotions that you want to experience. What is it you want to feel? What does a utopian life feel like to you? And it may be, again, some of these emotions that you've already listed, but think about what does a utopian life feel like? And then when you kind of list that, then I want you to think of, well, what are some practices? What are things that make me feel that way? Now, not necessarily altered substances, okay? That's not something we totally want to rely on, but I want you to think about what are things you do or things you could do that would make you feel this sense of peace, this sense of balance, this sense of abundance, some of these emotions that you guys associate with the ultimate utopia. I want you to think about that. Now, a lot of times people will start off and they'll say, well, I want to list my goals, things I want to achieve, and that's cool. But I want to start today with thinking about the emotions, how you want to feel, and then work backwards from there. Think about the feeling, and then think about what things you could do, what things you can do in your life to create that feeling for you. And these can be small things or they could be larger things, right? And then think about some goals, things that you want to achieve. And then when you're looking at these things you want to achieve, and then you say, okay, these goals that I want to achieve, are they connected to these emotions that I want to experience? And that can get really kind of interesting, right? Because there's some things you could say you want to achieve that don't necessarily line up with your goals, these emotional goals that you say you want to experience. And I think that kind of becomes a gauge of sorts. If you're doing things and the stress is sort of overwhelming and you have to stop and think, okay, I understand working under pressure. I understand doing tough things. But there's something about this moment. It doesn't feel the way I want to feel. How can I change that feeling? Is there something I need to let go? Are there another set of decisions I need to make? Do I need to adjust the goal? Because this feeling doesn't feel right. This doesn't feel like the utopia I want to have. And those are some of the thoughts that I kind of want us to think about. Now, I know that some of you are saying, okay, well, we've talked about this emotion, this feeling, this sort of intuitive dynamic around the emotion we want to experience around our personal utopia. But what about the larger world? What about the things that are going on? What about some of these broader issues? Okay, awesome. I would still say, let's list those different emotions, these emotions and these that you want to experience. And then I want you to sit and think about, okay, well, what does a utopian world look like? And you can just sort of jot that down. What does it look like? And when you're jotting down what it looks like, I think it's super important to kind of think about what you're actually articulating, right? So some people would say, well, a utopian world doesn't have racism. Got it. What does it feel like to be in a world where there's no racism? And then two, then I would say, well, and what are those emotions? And then what does it look like? What does a world without racism look like? And really kind of give that some thought, and this is outside of sort of policies or laws and so forth, although those are all super duper important. But I want you to think about, what does it look like? What does it feel like? And then what actions would I take? What actions do I need to take to create that sort of emotion, that feeling? And kind of keep it in the feeling space. Hey there, Aisha. If you're thinking about, okay, well, a utopian world is one where there's abundance and everyone has more than enough of what they need. Okay, great. What does that look like? And when everyone has what they need to accomplish all the goals they want to accomplish, what sort of actions do you take when that's the case? And sort of just give that a little bit of thought. So you're jotting down these different things that you think are really cool to have in like this ultimate utopian world, right? And you're thinking about maybe some of the life lessons that would be shared. You're thinking about certain things that would be studied, all sorts of stuff that you're thinking about. And then once you sort of have this list together, then I want you to go back and say, okay, great. We have this utopian space. I have an idea of what it looks like. I know what it feels like. And then my question becomes, wonderful. Where are you in this utopian world? Because, you can name maybe 100 things that would make a world utopian, and you can certainly contribute, but there's a unique way that you can contribute to this utopian world that you hold near and dear. There's a unique way that you can contribute to its manifestation. Things that you could do now, things that come naturally to you, that are within your grasp, the ways that you can build. And I want you to just kind of give some of that a little bit of thought. So just to go back, one of the first things we talked about were the emotions you want to experience and creating your own utopia. You want to have a wellspring of utopian emotions to tap into. Experiences as recall so that you have your personal utopian moment. Then you want to think about the life that you want to experience, the life that you have, the things you want to achieve. Really think about what your utopian life feels like. And then look at those feelings and then see how they line up with the goals and objectives that you set out. And then next, when you're starting to think about this larger world, and you're jotting down things that you think would be really cool to have in this larger world, again, think about what it feels like, and then think about what it looks like, and then think about, okay, well, what can I do? What am I good at? Do I have a knack for that I can do now that brings that into being? But I think one of the most important things that we've sort of established here is that utopia isn't just about something you're creating. You have to feel that utopia and you have to bring it with you. And that's the space that you use as the foundation to create and to ascertain or determine what your role is in the larger utopia. So that is the foundation for sort of creating utopias and thinking about utopias. And I'm wondering if you guys have any questions. Well, I'm going to, I know a lot of times, when we're sitting here and we're kind of thinking about utopia, uh, I've found that there's an issue around belief. People want to negotiate and argue about, is utopia possible? Is it not possible? But I think when it comes to sustaining yourself and looking at your own resilience, it's at some point about you creating a space of your own utopia and sort of building from there, and using that as the lens to function from. It's not so easy to build and create uh, when from a space of fear. It's not as easy to create from a space of anger, although those are all legitimate emotions and certainly ones that you can feel. But you want to, as quickly as possible, pivot that emotion and be able to pull on a certain aspect of recall, where you're able to recall the emotions that you associate with utopia so that you can adequately create from that space, and then create from a space where you're supposed to give. You want to be able to give from your own overflow. You want to be able to give from a perspective that best builds on your talents, and you want to build with people who are able to receive those talents and are really looking to connect and to build in the way that you see fit. Okay, we got a question. Can you put a time frame on creating a utopia in the external world? Interesting. Well, if you're always bringing utopia with you, right, then you have that internal space that you operate from. Uh, when it comes to a time frame in the larger world, it's interesting because at some point it really is about you, the space you're in, and how you contribute to the moment. Are you contributing in the way that's best fit for you to help shape these moments? And I think that it's also really important for you to hold a space for this utopia as well. You're holding a space in mind. Now, some people do vision boards, which are really cool. Some people like to jot down these idealized spaces and kind of have a list, and that's super cool too. But in your mind, there has to be a level of belief or possibility where it's almost like you're holding a space for these goals and for these utopias to manifest. And that space is just as powerful as the emotional space that you create to do your instant recall of utopia. Because this utopian world that you create, that you're holding in mind, that you have on your vision board, you're bringing that into your life. That space does exist somewhere in, I guess you could say, in another dimension. And it's about kind of bringing the best of that timeline into the present world. Can you talk a little more about how one should think about labor? Oh, interesting. Well, I think when it comes to labor in the personal sense, there's the work that you do to survive, right? So that you can get by. And then there's the work that you do to build and to contribute. I think it's really interesting how, in the current moment we're in, we're talking about essential workers. And all of a sudden we're seeing a new value for cashiers and our sanitation workers and our child care workers and our cleaning people, our maintenance people, our engineers. There's a newfound appreciation for the service and the fact that our society so much is on that. I noticed that there's a new appreciation for the arts, with so many people turning to IG and to other platforms to share the music that they create or to share the visual art. I mean, all these DJs, people who are like feeding souls and feeding emotions with their gifts. There's a newfound appreciation for these things. And some of that is very much labor. And some of that is very much labor of love, but I think that it's essential for us to recognize that they all kind of work hand in hand. I think that we have to assess for ourselves sometimes, think about how we can best contribute, but then knowing in all of our contributions, we're making a difference, big or small. There's no one job a little better than the other. All of these are helping to make differences. And I think that there's a lot of conversation about shared labor, about communal labor. There's a lot of thoughts about how we can build, but when you start on an individual level, I think there has to be a recognition that anything that you do, all work that you do, has an impact of some sort, and just sort of noting that it has an impact, I think, is very valuable. Let's see. I find that people's mode of operation would not support a utopia. How should one prepare to be productive in a utopia? It's a really interesting question. Because I guess for some people, utopia would mean there is no work. But I think that it's not so much that there is no work, but I think there's this idea of people doing what they like to do. What would the world look like if everyone was able to work and have careers that built on their gifts? If they were able to do things that they wanted to do. Um, and there's the sense of shared responsibility. And then sometimes people will say, well, you wouldn't have people working other jobs if everyone did what they wanted to do. And that's not necessarily true. I think that when we value a range of work, it and we think about people operating from their passions and creating a world where people can work from their passions, and things that excite them or contribute in ways. It sort of it changes how we look at work. It changes how we look at what we put our time into and what we value. Can I speak more to the idea of satisfaction of needs and how that will affect people's drives? That's so interesting because I think there's this thought that we're all driven by need. I mean, obviously, there's the hierarchy of needs, right? There's safety, there's food, there's clean water. There are these basic things that we need. But I think you can have a society where we have the things that we need, and people can still build on their talents and passions. Um, I don't know if scarcity is always the best drive. If the idea of, hey, you won't have a home if you don't work for it. I think we can have a society where everyone can be housed, and still contribute, their still utilize their gifts, still add value to society without feeling like they need to stomp out their passions in order to have a roof over their head. There's a way that's possible with the abundance that we have in this world, but it is about us feeling okay with that. I think there's an idea that you have to, there has to be a certain kind of work that you do in order to live and survive. And there's the idea of scarcity. There's this notion of us valuing some work over others. There's this idea that some people worked harder than others and therefore certain people deserve things. There's these ideas that we're socialized around, but it's really not based around abundance. It's not based around growth, and it's not always based around gifts that people have to share. Let's see. I'm looking here. Servicing others helps build my utopia because it brings peace to me. Absolutely. And I think that's important to notice. I sometimes often work with teenagers and children, and there was one point when I was working on the Afrofuturism book, and I was asked to teach kindergarten kids how to dance, and I agreed to it. But my first thought wasn't that this was going to be this tremendous joy, and initially it was this odd challenge, but it became like a really beautiful challenge and probably some of the most satisfying work I'd ever done. Uh, and part of it is because I'm working with 5-year-olds and I'm teaching them yoga and I'm teaching them salsa, and they're balanced and they're excited. And I was able to help instill in them an appreciation for dance at an early age. I mean, if they never have another dance class again, at least they had one at 5 and they know they've moved their bodies in ways. So later on, when they get back into exercising, they'll know that certain things are possible because they did it once before. It's like planting a seed. I think there's a lot of work that we do that has value, and we have to know it has value. I think that's sort of essential. There's a lot of things that we do that really helps people, and we just have to recognize it in that way. Are there any other questions that you have? Hey, the Rourke, glad you checked in. Good to see you. Thanks, Theo, for coming in. I want to just say again, utopia begins with a recall of those moments, your own utopia. You being able to channel the emotions and the experiences that you've had or want to have, and really honing in on those emotions for yourself, and then creating from there with your visions. But then also looking at how you can best contribute. And sometimes determining how you can best contribute isn't always based on the skills you think you have. Sometimes it's about trying a couple different things, and then you find out you had these unique abilities you didn't know you had, and it has impact, and it makes a difference in people's faces, and at the very least, it transforms you, and it ultimately kind of changes the world. So when I often like to say, that we want to appreciate the ancestors and the wisdom we're able to pull from and draw from people who, took all kinds of great strides in the past, people who might have made mistakes in the past. But we can also pull from the future and think about a future that appreciates us now for the decisions that we're making, people in a future time who are able to thank us for the things that we're doing now that they can build upon. And so you're able to kind of pull from this wisdom of the past, but you can also pull from this wisdom of the future. And all of these things can transform your own sense of a personal utopia as you sort of find your place in the larger utopia that you envision and you work to manifest it. So if there's any other questions, I'd appreciate it. I see someone saying we have to envision it first. You want to envision it, you want to feel it, and then you want to believe it's possible and hold a space for it too. So there's a couple things. Like I said, there's there's the feeling, there's the seeing, but there's also the holding the space and believing. And that belief that it's possible will kind of undergird the decisions and the actions that you take now. I remember once talking to a guy who was working on someone's campaign. And he told me, he was like, yeah, they're not going to win, but I'm going to help them out anyway. And I was just thinking, wow, I would never want to run for a position and have somebody working for me who didn't believe I would actually get the job or didn't believe I would actually, win the race. And I was like, well, what's the point of working on something if you don't think it's possible? I mean, what is that about? So there is a belief component. And again, one of the things that people often wrestle with is this whole idea of seeing utopias as possible. That's really a tough one for a lot of people. Do crystals, gemstones play a role in your practice? I used to want to be an archaeologist. And so I've always been fascinated by rocks and stones. And I think crystals do have energies. And I do encourage people, if they get into crystals and those things kind of just help remind them of the utopian experiences and emotions that's deep within them, then by all means, utilize those as a practice. I'm always a cheerleader for turquoise. Turquoise has always kind of resonated with me. I used to like rose quartz a lot. Just as a kid, I always thought it was really kind of pretty. But again, whether it's you're looking at crystals, whether it's candles, whether it's pictures of loved ones, whether it's a picture you draw, whether it's your own vision board, all of these things are just utilized to help sustain your own sense of consciousness when you're thinking about utopias. So that's it, everyone. I want to thank you guys for tuning in, for listening to what I had to share. I will be doing more of these talks, and I'll do another IG poll and see what you want to hear next. If you guys have some thoughts about what you'd like me to talk about, using Afrofuturism as a lens, I'd appreciate it, and I'd be more than happy to do a talk with you. Hey there, Tania. I saw you checking in there. Thank you very much. Thank you for your question about crystals, Wind Yo-Yo. Thank you. What's this? Amethyst Waves? Oh, thank you so much. So thanks to all of you. Again, I want you to remember that the utopia you seek is within you, and you can recall all of those emotions. The ancestors, the wisdom of the ancestors appreciates you. The future appreciates you for all the decisions that you're making and all the exciting things that you're doing. Hey there, Ray Chardonnay. And the present thanks you for the consciousness that you're holding, for the thoughts that you're working through, for the work that you are building upon. The things that you do, your thoughts, your actions, your words, they all have impact. And you just want to be cognizant of that when you think about you bringing utopia with you. What words are you using? How are you speaking? What are you sharing with the world? So thanks again, everyone. I will be back in a couple days. I'll put out a poll to see what you guys want to hear next. And if there's some suggestions that you have, feel free. I love to share with you. Stay lifted. Stay optimistic. Keep doing the work. Keep drinking your tea. Take your vitamin C. And hold high consciousness. And I look forward to talking to you guys soon. Bye.